The Metamorphosis Part III. As Part 3 opens, Gregor has suffered for more than a month from a serious wound in his back. No one has removed the apple. However, Mr. Samsa has accepted that Gregor is still a member of the family and should be endured. Gregor's injury means that his ability to move is now very limited. The family feels badly about what has happened, so each evening they open the door to the living room so Gregor can see the family and listen to their conversation. Gregor learns that his mother now earns a living by sewing. Greta has taken a job as a salesperson. With the hope of getting a better job, she studies French and shorthand writing in the evening. The family is tired from their work, and Mr. Samsa often falls asleep in his chair at the table. Sometimes the father woke up and, as if quite ignorant that he had been asleep, said to the mother, "How long have you been sewing today?" and went right back to sleep while the mother and sister smiled tiredly to each other. Mr. Samsa doesn't take off his bank employee uniform when he comes home from work, as if he needs to be ready at a moment's notice. This makes the uniform look dirty. He stays up late each night, sleeping in the chair at the table, and when Mrs. Samsa and Greta physically drag him to bed, he says in a voice that can barely be heard that his life has become sad. Money concerns cause the family to fire the servant girl and hire an old cleaning woman in her place. The family is also forced to sell some pieces of family jewelry. But the family's biggest complaint is that they can't leave the current apartment, which is too big for their current financial situation, because they can't think of how Gregor might be moved. But Gregor fully recognized that it was not just consideration for him which was preventing a move, for he could have been transported easily in a suitable box with a few air holes. The main thing holding the family back from a change in living quarters was far more their complete hopelessness and the idea that they had been struck by misfortune like no one else in their entire circle of relatives and acquaintances. Gregor had stopped sleeping and is filled with competing emotions, a desire to help his family and a sense of anger that they ignore him. Greta still feeds him, but doesn't do it with concern or care for Gregor, and she doesn't clean his room very well anymore, leaving dust and garbage. Then, when Mrs. Samsa cleans Gregor's room on one occasion, Greta starts crying because she feels that Gregor is her responsibility. The cleaning woman discovers Gregor one day and doesn't react. She just stands and stares at him. After that, each morning and evening, she opens the door to look for Gregor and speak to him in words that she must have thought were friendly, such as, "Come here for a bit, old dung beetle," and "Hey, look at old dung beetle." But Gregor doesn't like the way she addresses him, so he doesn't respond. One day, when the cleaning lady starts up her usual conversation, Gregor is not in the mood and turns towards her as if to attack. But instead of being afraid of him, the cleaning woman merely lifts up a chair standing close by the door, and as she stood there with her mouth wide open, her intention very clear. She would close her mouth only when the chair in her hand had been thrown down on Gregor's back. "This goes no further, all right?" she asked as Gregor turned himself around again, and she places the chair calmly back in the corner. To earn extra money, the family has taken in 3 lodgers, or people who rent rooms. Gregor's room becomes a kind of storage room. Sometimes Gregor moves the objects to give himself more room to crawl around or for the sense of fun, but the effort exhausts him. One night, the cleaning lady accidentally leaves the door to the living room slightly open. Gregor can see the 3 lodgers eat while the family eats in the kitchen. Greta and Mrs. Samsa serve the 3 men, who inspect the food before accepting it. After the lodgers finish eating, a violin is heard in the kitchen, and the lodgers move closer to hear it. Mr. Samsa asks if the playing bothers them, and they respond that they would enjoy hearing the music in the living room. Greta begins playing, and Gregor pokes his head into the living room and isn't noticed. The lodgers lose interest in the performance, but Gregor is delighted and creeps forward. He wants to get Greta's attention to let her know that she could come to his room with her violin, where her playing would be appreciated. He would then tell her about the plan the family had to send her to music school. Then, one of the lodgers notices him. "Mr. Samsa!" called out the middle lodger to the father, and pointed his index finger without uttering a further word at Gregor as he was moving slightly forward. The violin fell silent. The middle lodger smiled, first shaking his head once at his friends, and then looked at Gregor once more. Mr. Samsa tries to lead the lodgers back to their room and to block the view of Gregor. They seem bothered, though it is unclear if it is Mr. Samsa's pushy behavior or the thought of Gregor that really bothers them. One lodger says he's canceling his room and will not pay for the time he has lived there, and the other 2 lodgers then also give notice that they will be leaving. After the lodgers go back to their room, bang the door shut and lock it, Greta is the first to speak. "My dear parents," says the sister, banging her hand on the table by way of an introduction, "things cannot go on any longer this way. Maybe you don't understand that. Well, I do. I will not utter my brother's name in front of this monster, and thus I say only that we must try to get rid of it. We have tried what is humanly possible to take care of it and be patient. I believe that no one can criticize us in the slightest." Mr. Samsa says to himself that Greta is right. Mrs. Samsa has trouble breathing properly and begins coughing. Greta hurries over to her and supports her. Greta's words cause Mr. Samsa to reflect, and he seems lost in thought, occasionally looking at Gregor, who has not moved. Greta says again that they must get rid of Gregor. "We must try to get rid of it," the sister now said decisively to the father, for the mother, in her coughing fit, wasn't listening to anything. "It is killing you both. I see it coming. When people have to work as hard as we do, they cannot also tolerate this endless torment at home. I just can't go on anymore." And she broke out into such a crying fit that her tears flowed down onto her mother's face. She wiped them off her mother with mechanical motions of her hands. Mr. Samsa wonders what they should do, but Greta doesn't have an answer and only shrugs her shoulders. Mr. Samsa says that if only Gregor could understand them, to which Greta shakes her head, indicating that there is no point in thinking that. Mr. Samsa repeats that if Gregor only understood them, there might be some solution. "It must be gotten rid of," cried the sister. "That is the only way, father. You must try to get rid of the idea that this is Gregor. The fact that we have believed it for so long, that is truly our real misfortune. But how can it be Gregor? If it were Gregor, he would have long ago realized that a communal life among human beings is not possible with such an animal, and would have gone away voluntarily. Then we would not have a brother. We could go on living and honor his memory. But this animal plagues us. It drives away the lodgers, which obviously take over the entire apartment, and leave us to spend the night in the alley. Just look, father," she suddenly cried out. "He's starting up again already." Gregor doesn't understand why Greta is suddenly so afraid. She leaves her mother and rushes behind her father. This action causes Mr. Samsa to stand up and half raise his arms in front of Greta as if to protect her. Gregor doesn't want to cause trouble for anyone, so he turns to go back to his room. He pauses, looks at his family, who look at him in silence and sorrow. When Gregor is finally inside of his room, he turns his head to look at his family. But almost immediately, Greta pushes the door closed and locks it behind him, saying, "Finally," to her parents. Alone in his room, Gregor wonders what to do next. He has no energy and can't move. There's pain throughout his body, but he has the sense that the pains are becoming weaker and weaker and will finally go away completely. Gregor is dying, but he still feels love for his family. He remembered his family with deep feeling and love. In this business, his own thought that he had to disappear was, if possible, even more decisive than his sister's. He remained in the state of empty and peaceful reflection until the tower clock struck 3 o'clock in the morning. From the window, he witnessed the beginning of a general dawning outside. Then, without willing it, his head sank down all the way, and from his nostril flowed out weakly his last breath. In the morning, the cleaning woman discovers Gregor's body, and in a loud voice carelessly yells to the household that Gregor is dead. Mr. and Mrs. Samsa get out of bed and come to Gregor's room. Greta, who's been sleeping in the living room since the lodgers moved in, looks out. They confirm that Gregor really is dead and notice how thin Gregor had become. They leave the room, and the cleaning lady opens the window and shuts the door. The lodgers come out of their room and wonder where their breakfast is. The cleaning lady silently indicates to them they could come to Gregor's room. They do, and stand around looking at Gregor's corpse. The Samsons then come out of their bedroom. Mr. Samsa has his wife in one arm and Greta on the other. They have all been crying. Mr. Samsa tells the lodgers to get out of their apartment immediately. They decide to pass the day resting and going for a stroll. Not only had they earned this break from work, but there was no question that they really needed it. So they sat down at the table and wrote 3 letters of apology. Mr. Samsa to his supervisor, Mrs. Samsa to her client, and Greta to her proprietor. And as they write, the cleaning woman tells them that her cleaning work is done, but she remains. Mr. and Mrs. Samsa ask her what she really wants, and the cleaning lady says with a smile on her face that the rubbish or trash from the next room, meaning Gregor's body, has been thrown out. She wants to go into detail, but Mr. Samsa stops her. Insulted, the cleaning lady leaves angrily and slams the door. Mr. Samsa says the cleaning lady will be fired that evening. Then all 3 left the apartment together, something they had not done for months now. and took the electric tram into the open air outside the city. The car in which they were sitting by themselves was totally engulfed by the warm sun. They talked to each other, leaning back comfortably in their seats, about future prospects, and they discovered that on closer observation that they were not at all bad, for all three had employment about which they had not really questioned each other at all, which was extremely favorable and with especially promising prospects. They decided to rent an apartment that would be smaller and cheaper, but in a better location. Almost at the same moment, Mr. and Mrs. Samsa realize that Greta has become a beautiful young woman, and they think the time has come to find a good, honest man for her. The story closes as they reach their destination, and Greta gets up and stretches.